Roxana Saberi at the New York Stock Exchange with your CBSN business headlines. Amazon is set to open a huge warehouse in Mexico. The 1 million square foot property is expected to be finished next year and would triple Amazon's distribution in the country. Retail stocks rose after Target said it was hiring around 100,000 workers for the holiday season. That's about 30,000 more than the company hired last year. Best Buy says it will no longer sell antivirus software made by the Russian software company Kaspersky Labs. And yesterday, the U.S. government banned federal agencies from using the software. The Department of Homeland Security has cited concerns about possible ties between Kaspersky officials and Russian intelligence services. Kaspersky denies any unethical ties with Russia. And Kroger is going for comfort. The second largest grocery chain in the U.S. is opening a comfort food restaurant called Kitchen 1883, a nod to when Kroger was founded. It opens next month in Union, Kentucky, and is described as a fresh new take on American comfort food with a made-from-scratch menu, handcrafted cocktails, and a family-friendly atmosphere. And those are some of today's top business headlines. For CBSN, I'm Roxana Saberi.
Dreads the cramped airline seat if you're flying coach especially, right? And now passenger rights groups believe the small space could be a death trap.
Really? Well, they are demanding that the FAA reevaluate its standards. Chris Van Cleve is at Reagan National Airport with a closer look.
Airline manufacturers have to certify that they can get everybody off a completely full airliner with half of the exits blocked in 90 seconds or less. That 90-second rule is based on the idea that that's enough time to get everyone off before fire, smoke, or water could turn a situation deadly. But evacuations don't always go smoothly. Last fall, this American 767 had to evacuate after an engine caught fire during takeoff in Chicago. On board, passengers pushed and shoved to get out. Some stopped to grab their luggage. It took 116 passengers and 9 crew more than 2 minutes to get off.
Oh my God, oh my God, oh my God.
Hector Cardenas was on that flight and captured the mayhem on his phone.
Everyone's shoving and pushing against you in such a way where you're pretty much almost squashed.
Passenger safety advocates worry the ever-shrinking airline seat is creating another potential danger during an evacuation. Just as the passengers themselves are getting bigger, the space between rows has shrunk from as much as 35 inches to 31, sometimes down to just 28.
The biggest fear is that people won't be able to get out in time.
Paul Hudson is president of Flyers' Rights, an advocacy group that sued to force the FAA to regulate seat size.
They claim that they have no jurisdiction over comfort. So,
But isn't it safety?
Well, they view safety very narrowly.
A federal court agreed there was the possibility of plausible life or death issues. The FAA says it is reviewing the ruling.
It's a true safety problem, and the FAA needs to protect us.
Congressman Steve Cohen introduced legislation to require the FAA to establish a minimum airline seat size.
We don't have seats and aisles that are capable of facilitating a safe exit.
The group that represents U.S. Airlines says its members meet or exceed federal safety standards and do train for evacuations. Boeing tells CBS News that it conducts its evacuation tests in accordance with federal regulations. However, those are typically done in a hangar and don't factor in passenger behavior like taking your luggage. Anne-Marie and Blatt.
So this is purely subjective.
I know what you're going to say. What are you going to say?
It's really cramped in those planes.
It is. And what I was thinking was, if you've ever had to go to the bathroom, like in a hurry on a plane, you know it takes minutes.
Forever.
It's all this side jockeying. It takes forever for people to get out of the way for you. Can you imagine if they're
you're
panicked?
Right. It's not even the seats that are unbearably cramped, and I feel like my legs are unusable for an hour after I get off a long haul flight. But it's also the aisle. Like trying to get, if you ever had your luggage like at a bin that's like a couple of seats behind you,
totally.
and you got to get back there to get something, it's,
If safety is the reason for a little more leg room, let's bring it on,
Exactly right. And Elaine joins us now from Windley Key in Florida. So Elaine, you have spoken with several people down there in the Keys. How are they feeling about the recovery efforts at this time?
You know what? They can't move fast enough. People down in the lower Keys, particularly where Irma hit the hardest, don't have any of the basic necessities that we all take for granted sometimes. Power, so there's no air conditioning, running water, so you can't even have personal facilities to use a restroom, much less take a shower. Communication, so that you can call and check on your family or your neighbors, or let your family know that you're okay. And over the course of the last few days, not having that since Sunday, when you have temperatures here in Florida in the 90s with 90% humidity, all of that has taken such an emotional toll because people don't know when or where the help is coming. And there's not even a way to get that word out because there's no communication, because there's no power to turn on a television to find out where to go to get the help. So things are very quickly becoming desperate, and the feeling among the residents that we've spoken with is that the help can't come quickly enough.
So what about the crews that are down there working right now? You mentioned a number of things that are causing problems for residents, including the heat. How are the crews operating under this oppressive heat? How are they staying safe?
Yeah, no, that's such a great question, because when you have this kind of intense, extreme environment, everyone's susceptible to it, including first responders. So we were talking with members of California Task Force 1, and just to give you an idea, they're basically under the direction of FEMA. Normally there are Los Angeles City firefighters, a group of about 74 firefighters, 6 civilians, and they are basically like this special operating team. Their members have expertise in not just firefighting, not just urban search and rescue, but things like swiftwater rescue, hazmat specialists. They have an engineer, so that as they're moving their 15 vehicle convoy over what potentially could be a compromised bridge, that engineer can go out and give the okay and take a look and make sure everyone's going to be safe. I mean, there is danger everywhere for these first responders. It is not just the heat and humidity. And you have to remember that FEMA is still just conducting that initial data collection right now to find out, going house to house, island to island. If you were to look at a map here of the Florida Keys, it is 112 miles long. It is a huge geographic distance to cover. And many of these areas are not accessible, frankly, by foot. Some of the areas that we drove through, we couldn't even get through some of these streets because they're flooded. So it is a painstaking process for them. It's not just the heat and humidity. Oh, that's a huge factor. And what they've told us is they are very mindful of doing the things that are very important to making sure a human body functions, like drinking water and taking breaks and that kind of thing. But after having been embedded with them yesterday, I really have tremendous respect for the work that they do under these punishing conditions, even now that the hurricane has long since passed.
It's an important distinction, Elaine, that you've highlighted for our viewers, especially just putting it in the simplest of terms, just getting some water, using the toilet, taking a shower, having communications with the outside world. So here's a question for you, given the fact that you've been there for a number of days covering this hurricane and the aftermath. Is it more difficult for folks who are trying to get home to their places in the Keys, or is it harder for the folks who decided to weather out the hurricane that are stuck there? I mean, because I know that there have been people that want to get back and they want to assess the damage and they want to see what's left, if anything, of their homes, and there's others that are still there.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great point. We haven't been up to the checkpoint, frankly, and because there's no real communication, I haven't actually seen, but I've been told that the line at the checkpoint to get in is not only long, but it is filled with people who are obviously understandably emotional about wanting to get back in and see their properties and make sure that if they have the ability to check on a loved one, they can go ahead and do that. But the problem with that, from the authorities' point of view, is you still don't have all those basic necessities to survive. What does adding more people to that situation do except compound it?
Right.
So I would say that from the point of view of the people that we've spoken with, that's the only thing I can speak to right now. There are folks who clearly feel shaken by this, and I'm talking about people who are tough Florida Keys residents who have weathered many a storm, who have come up to us and said, can I please use your phone? I haven't had a chance to tell my relatives that we're okay. People crying, coming up to us and clearly traumatized by this experience that even if they physically weren't hurt and they managed to escape, if their home came through okay, there is still this scarring that is taking place as we speak from people here who decided to remain behind.
And I imagine that authorities also want to make sure that, if there are people that did not survive, that crews are able to access the buildings, take, remains out before they start filling it up with other people.
Well, that's right. And I didn't mention this, but there is a curfew here and they strictly enforce it. So it's a dawn to dusk curfew, and anyone who is out, they are taking very seriously here, because looting can be an issue. If you can imagine, when resources are scarce, and we're not talking about monetary resources, we're talking about the basics, food and water, people become very desperate. And so that's the situation that we're in right now. I can tell you that we were out at what was an airdrop on one of the keys, Big Pine Key, where there was a helicopter that had just dropped off a bunch of MREs, meals ready to eat, so food, and some cases of water. And within about 30 seconds of that helicopter departing, a woman pulled up in a minivan and they started loading up their own personal vehicle and drove away. And not long after that, 2 sheriff's deputies came rolling up and said, "We're here to guard this." That is how desperate it is. It is jarring, frankly, to see at some of these stations they've set up, water stations where they have cases of water, to see armed soldiers standing with long guns at the ready. This is the situation now in the Florida Keys.
It is hard to believe that you're describing the Florida Keys, a place where people go for vacation, Margaritaville. It's laid back. You sort of kick back and enjoy yourself. It sounds completely transformed. Elaine Keano in Windley Key, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
This Cassini spacecraft will end its 2-decade-long mission around Saturn. The probe is about to run out of fuel, so scientists can no longer guide it. Cassini will make a dramatic dive into Saturn's atmosphere or crash into one of the planet's many moons.
The spacecraft has sent back more than 300,000 images of the ringed planet. Chris Martinez has more on the end of a groundbreaking mission.
Giovanni Domenico Cassini.
After more than a decade studying Saturn, Rosalie Lopez has come to think of the Cassini spacecraft as a member of the team.
This is about half the size of it.
Yeah, it's half the size.
It's why saying goodbye is so bittersweet.
It's sad. On the other hand, you're pleased that the job was done and it was well done.
And liftoff of the Cassini spacecraft on a billion-mile trek to Saturn.
20 years after Cassini left Earth, its mission is ending. Since arriving at Saturn in 2004, the probe has beamed back more than 300,000 images of the ringed giant and its dozens of moons. This one, called Enceladus, now getting a lot of attention after Cassini revealed a global ocean beneath its frozen surface.
These ocean worlds, these moons orbiting these giant planets, are places where there could be current life actually living.
Eric Sturm was just a senior in college when Cassini left Earth. He's now plotting its final hours. The spacecraft is nearly out of gas and will use what's left to plunge itself into Saturn's atmosphere, sending back data as it burns up.
We're collecting science all the way up until the last minute.
It's a fiery end to a voyage that will fuel research for years to come. New missions to Saturn, perhaps to look for life, are already in the works. Chris Martinez, CBS News, Pasadena, California.
Home right now. Equifax is under growing pressure to explain just how hackers stole personal data from 143 million Americans. Maybe you might not even know it. The House Energy and Commerce Committee yesterday has sent a letter asking Chief Executive Richard Smith to appear next month.
About 40 state attorney generals are also investigating this, so Anna Werner spoke to 2 of them.
Equifax says it has hired an independent cybersecurity firm to look into the extent of this hack. Since revealing this massive security breach, the company's been blasted by angry consumers and a variety of state and federal officials who all want answers.
This is the most egregious data breach we have ever seen. It is as bad as it gets.
Massachusetts Attorney General Maura Healey says she will sue Equifax for violating state consumer protection laws.
If you're a company like Equifax and you're out there scooping up a whole bunch of data and information on people, we have laws on our books that say you have to protect that information.
Eric Schneiderman, New York's Attorney General, may file a lawsuit as well. He says credit reporting agencies don't face the same scrutiny as banks, hospitals, and others that handle confidential consumer data.
I think you're going to see changes to the industry as well as investigations as to whether the company and any individuals engaged in illegal activity.
Equifax discovered it was hacked in July, but only went public last week. Sensitive data like birth dates, social security, and driver's license numbers were compromised.
This is really an attack on our whole economic system.
On Wednesday, Mark Warner, vice chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee, urged the Federal Trade Commission to investigate.
Right now we have 49 different laws around the country. We need a single law.
Warner is one of 37 senators from both parties who also asked the FTC, the Justice Department, and the Securities and Exchange Commission to look into possible insider trading. 3 Equifax executives sold nearly $2 million in company stock days after the data breach was discovered. Equifax says those officials were not aware of the hack. Many consumers requested to freeze their credit, but that may not be enough.
But there are other types of identity theft, and a credit freeze will not lock the thieves out of that type of behavior.
Now, Equifax says it's intensely investigating this intrusion, says it's working with law enforcement to try to figure all this out. Vlad and Anne-Marie?
Anna Warner, thank you very much for that report.
The middle class has consumer confidence. They consume, injecting demand into the economy, creating jobs. Revenue neutral is a very important standard for us to have. Growth is very, I tell anybody who goes to any meeting for us, put growth in the middle of the table. Growth is what is important. Growth of good paying jobs, growth in our economy. And that growth means that we do so in a way that creates jobs and reduces the deficit. What the Republicans have been proposing would increase the debt by $3 trillion at a minimum. We cannot go down that path. So they want to say, oh, the growth is going to pay the tab. It never has. It's only created more debt. They're trickled down. Now let's make a judgment when we see what they have. But so far, it's not about tax reform. What we want to do is engage them in a bipartisan way in simplification, fairness, closing special interest loopholes, and having appropriate revenue to meet the needs of the American people and create growth in our economy. Because growth does not just come from tax cuts for the wealthy. That's what they think. It hasn't. Growth comes from the education of the American people, investments in research and development. We will have our agenda on this as part of the better deal. But yes, to your question, revenue neutral is very important to us. So again, whether it's what we have coming up or certain deadlines, which was part of our discussion last night, that we have certain deadlines coming up, September 30th, many things expire. We'll have to extend them by the 30th or shortly thereafter. You see a lot of activity on health care. Senator Sanders has introduced his in the House. Our Democrats have introduced Medicare for everyone over 50 to 64. All of these are on the table to be considered. Universal care, that is our goal. We think the Affordable Care Act is a path to that. If they have a better idea, let's see what the numbers are and how we can come together about it. But I don't want anybody to think that the Affordable Care Act is not an important path to universal care. And that's why, coming back to the question, we want the cost-sharing reductions to be made permanent. And that's what we asked the president, to make them permanent, or else have language in the bill that says Congress can act, and it doesn't have to just be the president, because the more you have the integrity of the system, the more people stay in, the more outreach you do, the bigger the pool, the healthier the population, the lower the cost to everyone, bringing us closer to universal health care for all Americans. Now we have 14 votes on it. Excuse myself. Thank you.
The president just now in Florida said we are not looking at citizenship. We are not looking at amnesty.
We're not looking at amnesty. We're never looking at amnesty.
But citizenship, you said that it was your...
Well, that's in the bill. That's in the bill.
So he seems to not...
Well, you know what, maybe, I can't, I'm not here to respond to tweets. You asked me about the meeting. I'm telling you about the meeting. I'm telling you where we are on it. I think the issue of citizenship is not just about these young people, which would be justification enough, or about other undocumented immigrants in our...
So that's House Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi speaking, but we're going to pop back over to Fort Myers where the president is speaking. He's about to receive a briefing about recovery efforts.
Chuck Schumer there on the floor of the Senate. This is the story we've been covering all morning long, which is the growing crisis in Myanmar as refugees from that country pour across the border into Bangladesh. They are being persecuted because of their religion. They are Muslims.
Right now, actually, Chuck Schumer is talking about DACA. We heard that he and Nancy Pelosi announced that they had hammered out a deal with President Trump on DACA. Now the president sort of rephrased that, said they were sort of working towards something. Let's listen in.
It's ineffective. It involves a lot of difficult eminent domain, taking people's property, and apparently it's not being paid for by Mexico. In fact, I listened to Fox News this morning. I'm starting to do that, see what's going on over there. And they keep saying the president promised a wall in the campaign. Yeah, he also promised that Mexico would pay for it. Where's Mexico? They've said 12 times they're not paying for it. That's not the promise he made. And finally, on the wall, it sends a terrible symbol to the world about the U.S., about who we are, what kind of country we are. For decades, since the 1880s, a beautiful statue in the harbor, in the city in which I live, has been the symbol of the world to America, that great torch that symbolizes what a noble land we are. Can you imagine if in future decades that symbol was replaced by a big, foreboding wall? That's not who America is, was, or hopefully will be. Now, we're for sensible border security, as I mentioned. And there are a lot more effective ways of securing the border than a wall. A wall can be scaled over. I'm sure those who love the wall, I'm sure they've heard of ladders. A wall can be tunneled under. I'm sure those who support the wall have heard of shovels. It's a medieval solution for a modern problem. A Game of Thrones idea for a world that is a lot closer to Star Wars. And the thing is, we have new modern solutions using our best technology. We discussed some of them at the White House last night. Drones. These drones can spot the difference from a deer or a human being crossing the border. We have great sensory equipment. Our military has specialized in this kind of stuff. A lot of it's made in Syracuse, New York, I'm proud to say. We can rebuild roads along the border. Talk to the people on the Border Patrol and they'll say a lot of places don't have roads. So if they see someone crossing the border, they can't get to them. And of course, there's the bipartisan McCall-Thompson bill, McCall a Republican, Thompson a Democrat, in the House that has broad bipartisan support that sets certain standards. Every one of these ideas would provide better, more effective border security than a medieval wall. So there's still much to be done. We have to put meat on the bones of the agreement. The details will matter. But it was a very, very positive step for the president to commit to DACA protections without insisting on the inclusion of or even a debate about the border wall. Now on the Equifax data breach, Mr. President, what has transpired over the past several months is one of the most egregious examples of corporate malfeasance since Enron. Equifax has exposed the most sensitive personal information of over half of the United States citizens. Names, addresses, social security numbers, driver's licenses, and in some cases, even their credit history. Clearly, There were inadequate data security standards.
So we've been listening to Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer talk about the importance of codifying DACA, making it a law. Now, there was something very sort of interesting last night. The president had a working dinner with Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi, as well as some other people. And out of that dinner, we got announcements from the lawmakers saying that they had hammered out a deal in regards to DACA that did not include funding for the wall. That sent the Twittersphere and conservative bloggers and many people all abuzz, trying to figure out whether or not...
And even some representatives of Steve King and others who sort of said, look, the president is selling out to his base, the folks that got him elected, the people, the core group of supporters who really believed that the president was going to build, in the words of the president, a big, beautiful wall.
Right. Now, since then, the president has sort of clarified or elaborated on the meeting. He said that, you know, they had a constructive meeting. They were working towards something that, in fact, in regards to the wall, it's currently being worked on, that the wall, that fences are being reinforced, and that he said, actually, just before he departed for Florida, that, in fact, there will be a wall built, and it'll be paid for down the road. So we don't know.
We don't know. We're going to have to wait and find out, because we're expecting also the Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell is going to be speaking as well. So we'll hear what he has to say, and when he does take to the podium there, we'll bring it to you on CBS. Situation out of Myanmar. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell says the country's leader Aung San Suu Kyi has agreed to help Rohingya refugees.
This comes despite mounting criticism over the Nobel Prize winner and pro-democracy activist reaction to the humanitarian crisis.
During our call, Suu agreed with the need for immediate and improved access of humanitarian assistance to the region, particularly by the International Red Cross. And she conveyed that she's working toward that end. She reiterated her view of the universality of human dignity and of the pressing need to pursue peace and reconciliation among the communities in Rakhine State. Suu emphasized to me that violations of human rights will need to be addressed. Moreover, she stressed that the situation in Rakhine State is a protracted, long-standing problem, and that she's trying very hard to improve conditions.
The UN says around 400,000 Rohingya people have fled violence in the Rakhine State in Myanmar. Tens of thousands are pouring into Bangladesh daily. The Rohingya are a Muslim minority group of about 1 million people who have been persecuted by Myanmar's government for years.
An armed rebel group attacked police posts last month. This triggered a new wave of violence and retaliation from that country's military. And now innocent civilians are suffering. BBC News South Asia correspondent Justin Rawlett is in Teknaf, Bangladesh, with a closer look.
Rashida is 9 months pregnant. She is expecting any day. But this is where she's living with 15 other family members, and it is almost certainly where she'll have to give birth.
I'm worried. There is no help. Nobody's getting any food. Here there is no rice, no vegetables, nothing. I'm starving.
I first met her a few days back. She'd hiked for 7 days through the hills and jungle to get here. She says her village had been burnt to the ground. We've seen her and her family moved on by the authorities and driven off the land by fellow refugees. Many nights she's had to sleep under the skies despite the monsoon rain. Now her baby is sick and her husband has jaundice. And tens of thousands of other refugees are, like Rashida, living in these filthy makeshift cities that are mushrooming on the muddy hilltops here. They arrive bewildered. If they want a plastic sheet or bamboo to make a shelter, they pay. They often have to fight just to get food.
These guys are well-meaning Bangladeshis just trying to help out, but just look how chaotic this is. And it's so demeaning for these people to have to beg for food.
There is growing criticism of the way Bangladesh is handling this crisis.
We have to give them shelter so that they can live, they can get some food, medication.
All the big international aid agencies are here, but the government restricts what they can do. For example, the UN's main refugee body, the UNHCR, is not allowed to work with the vast majority of the refugees.
We're discussing with the government to see how we can provide assistance. What needs to happen next is for us to work closer together to make sure that land is allocated, that temporary shelter is provided, so that things can be a little more organized.
And while that discussion takes place, what these people really need is food and fresh water. Somewhere clean to live and sleep. Rashida needs medical care and a safe place to have her baby. What she and all the refugees need is a home.
Taking it back. News.com.
We're following a developing situation out of Myanmar. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell says the country's leader, Aung San Suu Kyi, has agreed to help Rohingya refugees.
This comes despite mounting criticism over the Nobel Prize winner and pro-democracy activist reaction to the humanitarian crisis.
During our call, Dalsu agreed with the need for immediate and improved access of humanitarian assistance to the region, particularly by the International Red Cross. And she conveyed that she's working toward that end.